Practices case study by Digayat Assasi. This is a video presentation about 3 high leverage practices that I have focused on to guide me through my teaching practice. The objective of the study is to evaluate the impact of actively applying 3 high leverage practices on students' learning and progression. I have picked LHP 5, implementing norms and routines for classroom discourse and work, LHP 7, specifying and reinforcing productive student behavior, LHP 14, designing single lessons and sequences of lessons. The reason behind this choice is the fact that I have realized early in my placement that those 3 aspects of practice are challenging, especially for novice teachers like me. The case study. I have chosen class 4G for several reasons. First, it is a challenging class, not only for me, but for the other teachers as well. What is particular to this class is the combination of the students, where we have up to 9 low ability students, mainly boys. Second, the behavior in the classroom is a big concern: irresponsible talking, shouting out, and disruptive behavior. Students do not respond to common traditional motivational strategies such as rewards, sanctions, success ladder, and gazing. And of course, academic achievement is also a big concern. I'd like to start my presentation with this definition of the purpose of education by Emodino, Young, and Damasio. The chief purpose of education is to cultivate children's building of repertoires of cognitive and behavioral strategies and options, helping them to recognize the complexity of situations and to respond in an increasingly flexible, sophisticated, and creative ways. LHP 5, establishing norms and routines for classroom discourse and work. The theory behind this LHP, the work of Maslow, hierarchy of needs, and the need for safety in particular, the Bobo-Doll experiment, Bandura, social cognitive theory, and locus of control by Rotter. Locus of control by Rotter. So where is the origin of the controlling force? Is it in you or in your environment? Briefly, applying this theory to the classroom context means that students who attribute their lack of success to luck or fate, external locus of control, will be less likely to invest energy and time in achieving goals and acquiring knowledge or developing skills, whereas those who believe they have control over their actions, internal locus of control, will take ownership of their learning. The same applies to behavior. I usually tell students that they have the choice. Behaving or being disruptive is a choice, and that one has to take full responsibility of his choices. I feel like this theory is relevant for LHP 5, 7, and 14 as well. So it is my behavior as a student that determines my achievement, whether on the academic level or the social level. I always explain to my students that I am not happy when making a negative comment or putting their names down the ladder or penalizing their behavior, but that it is their choice of behaving that way that led to that consequence. The aim for students is to become responsible and aware for their actions. How do we establish norms and routines? The case of 4G. So every session, after checking the attendance and warmly welcoming students to the classroom with a smile and a bonjour followed by the name of the student, I start by asking them to remind us of the rules in our session using our instructions, les instructions. I also ask them to remind us of the rules, for example, for participation, where they are expected to emphasize on the fact that shouted out answers will not get rewarded, even if correct, and where they mimic the movement they are supposed to do in order to reply to questions. Right arm up, left index in the mouth, and waiting for my son to answer. I keep reinforcing norms and rules throughout the session, going back and forth to our norms chart and insisting on the fact that we are establishing conditions to maximize learning outcomes. Our classroom rules are in French. Students are asked to guess the meaning of these instructions, the reason behind them, and then the implication of these instructions, and their behavior is discussed. Students know the consequences of misbehaving or non-compliance. So far, I have been focusing on 5 basic instructions out of 9, which are related to looking at the teacher, listening to the teacher, raising their hand to ask questions or to answer, and I have been reinforcing them consistently whenever there is a need to. I have also introduced 4G to their new seating chart. I have worked on the seating plan specifically for French, where the 9 students that are displaying deviant behavior will be sitting not only separately but also not facing each other. Each one of them is sitting next to a body which is a student who is more able and more emotionally stable and who carries oneself well in terms of behavior. For each table, I have appointed a team leader, and I have explained to students that from now on we will start a competition between tables, and I have introduced introduced the chart to them where earn it points will be noted. I have asked them, why do you think I have chosen students R, E, S, and L as team leaders? Answers were diverse, and it seems like students thought it had something to do with being good at French. I have explained it to them that the chosen team leaders were picked because of their positive behavior in the classroom, not for their academic achievement. I said that they were responsible, resilient, polite, team workers, and reflective individuals, and that these are the main traits of lifelong learners. I have, of course, specified the expected behavior that could lead to earning points as a team, and also that a team can lose a point if one of the team members is not aligning with the classroom expectations. The winning team will be able to choose his reward, whether a positive email to parents, a token, a house point, a certificate, a medal, or even a trophy. This strategy allowed me to benefit from peer pressure to minimize disturbances. Moving on to LHP 7, specifying and reinforcing productive student behavior. Defining what is expected from students in terms of behavior, as well as stressing over the need for them to conduct themselves in a way that promotes learning, is a crucial prerequisite to creating favorable conditions in the classroom. Students need to be introduced to what is appropriate behavior in the classroom, especially that they come from different contexts and that behavior that might be acceptable at home might not be classroom friendly. As a teacher, I have to model the behavior I want my students to reproduce, but also be mindful of my own behavior and how respectful I am of the rules. For example, if I want a student to be polite and greet each other, my students to be polite and greet each other in French for French class, I have to start my lesson by greeting them in French and keep praising the effort that the ones who are willing to reply back in French do until the whole class becomes confident enough to greet me in French. Reinforcing rules and inhibiting poor behavior by consistently supporting, rewarding, and celebrating positive behavior is more effective than criticizing and fault-finding students who display unwanted behavior. Rewarding positive behavior sends a message to students that the teacher gives attention to good behavior, which discourages attention seekers from misbehaving. The theories behind LHP 7, Law of Effect and Exercise, Thorndike, Skinner, Operant Conditioning, Bandura, Social Learning Theory, Rotter, Locus of Control, Koenig, The Vividness, and Free and Will White, 5 Basic Needs. Going back to the definition of Imodino Young and Damasio, our role as teachers is to help students build their own toolkit of skills that will help them throughout their life. One of the abilities or skills that I like to see my students develop is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is defined as one's belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish challenging tasks. Students with high self-efficacy believe they can perform well and are more likely to view difficult tasks as something to be mastered rather than something to be avoided. As a teacher, I can use strategies to build self-efficacy, for example, through mastery experiences or students' own successful experiences, vicarious experiences, witnessing peers succeed, social persuasion, teachers' praise and positive feedback boosts self-efficacy, emotional state, emotionally stimulating students in a positive way can inspire eagerness for learning and induce strong performances. So for my 4G class, I went literally from pointing out disruptive behavior and giving importance and attention to students who were undisciplined to indicating the positive behavior that matches our classroom expectation, as well as praising or rewarding the students that deploys that behavior. The closer the behaving student to the disruptive one, the stronger the impact in terms of negative behavior extinction. Consistency is the key to successfully eradicate unwanted behavior. Students might interpret discrepancy in applying reinforcers as lack of decisiveness from my part, which means that I would have to start a new cycle of conditioning. For example, instead of pointing out students who are chatting and not paying attention, I identify a couple of students that are indeed sitting quietly and focused on the lesson. I turn to the success ladder, stand next to it, and act as if I'm thinking about who to move up or down the ladder, and then move names up instead of down, and praise them verbally, saying, I like how student M is sitting quietly, listening and focusing on the lesson. Keep it going, student M, good job, etc. That will send a signal that I am paying attention and rewarding positive behavior, which will in turn increase positive behavior in the classroom. I make sure that I maintain eye contact with all students and use hand signals and gestures, which implies that I have to be aware of everything that happens in the classroom. That's what Koenig in 1970 defines as vividness. It teaches awareness of potentially disruptive behavior and immediate attention to that behavior. It is a skill that I believe I will need to develop further in order to improve my classroom management performances. Redressing negative behavior by focusing on positive behavior instead of pointing out the unwanted one leads to extension of the disruptive behavior. The explanation is, if you sanction a student each time he or she engages in an undesired behavior and taking into consideration that the fact that maybe the aim of the behavior is to catch teachers' attention, then using reprimands could work as a reinforcer of negative behavior. Example, when a student shouts out the answer, I actually act as if I did not hear him and pass to another student who exhibits the behavior expected, then allow him to choose his reward, then share with the rest of the class how proud I am of the student, not only because his answer was correct, but also because he was raising his hand sensibly. Moving on to LHP 14, designing single lessons and sequences of lessons, how to plan cooperative activities to maximize information assimilation. Planning lessons is one of the most challenging facets of teaching, and it has a strong impact both on the quality of teaching and learning, but also on the behavior in the classroom. Usually teachers plan lessons and sequences of lessons around a concept that they want students to grasp. The lessons should be organized in a way that helps gradation of the learning from a subcategory of the concept to the whole concept. The sequences of lessons need to be coherent and maintain the focus on the main subject so as to create a continuum. For example, for module Me, we started with teaching students how to introduce themselves in French. Then second lesson is about family members. Third lesson is about how to introduce family members in French. The fourth one is about describing oneself and family members. The focus is still on me and my environment. For a lesson plan to be effective, the objectives need to be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timed, but also teachers need to keep in mind the different academic needs to cater for in the classroom. Even our objectives need to be differentiated, since the teacher needs to take into consideration while planning academic and motivational potential difficulties that students may encounter during the lesson. That's what justifies the use of 3 success criteria and a challenge in the objective session. I prefer with my students to do small secure steps than giant wobbly ones. The content should be linked to previous knowledge, to their living experiences, to their context and cultural backgrounds. Using cooperative fun activities to scaffold learning. According to Brunner and Vygotsky, there is a limit to what one can achieve alone, whereas cooperating expands the boundaries of learning for struggling students to an extent. Teachers need to look at students' disruptive behavior as a sign, a warning of a dissatisfied need, and not as being naughty, rude, or lazy. Instead of focusing on the consequence of undesirable behavior, teachers should be proactive by planning fun, diverse, differentiated group activities and an engaging, meaningful lesson for students. I personally like to sing with students educational songs, days of the week, the number songs, the adjectives. We play competitive games, boys versus girls, splat, or class versus the teacher, but we also do write sentences or paragraphs, drawing what they understood or making a collage. Assessment for learning, gathering information about students' progression and evaluating the effectiveness of instruction so as to address any misconceptions. These are the strategies that I am using for AFL. They are pretty simple and easy for students, so I can visually identify the students that are not confident enough and who did not reach the mastery level, and then allow them more time to practice and absorb information. So it's fist to 5 and thumbs up or down. I have 2 comments that I need to add. The lesson plan is a guideline, and we as teachers, we need to be flexible and reactive when feeling or noticing that students are not engaged, and if the lesson is too challenging for them, and modify the instruction accordingly. There is no set in stone. My experience with my classes taught me that there is no point in trying to push students in order to finish a lesson the way it is planned if they cannot keep up with it, and if there is no progress, and if a lesson is not good as in effective. As a teacher, I should be able to feel it and should have the courage to improvise and adjust my instruction accordingly. The second comment is that the 3 LHPs that I have focused on these couple of months, as effective and efficient as they can be, will not serve their purpose if not accompanied with continuous self-assessment and reflexivity. Thank you very much. This is the end of the video, and these are the references for my video.